So pork ribs, when you order pork ribs or go to the store to buy pork ribs, many times you're offered three different types. You have baby back ribs, you have St. Louis style ribs, and you have full spare ribs. Well, they're all from the same part of the animal. They're just different locations on the rib cage. Not to get too graphic, but the baby back ribs are very high on the rib cage. The St. Louis cut is in the center of the rib cage, and the full spares are from the baby backs down, all the way down through the rib tips. So what we did today is we brought baby back ribs so you can take a look at it, and I'll tell you how I like to prepare them, because there's no right or wrong. I mean, you can do it any way you want, and people do it many different ways. But when I'm preparing, it's pretty basic and pretty simple. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to work on a set of full spare ribs so that you can see the different parts and decide how you want to prepare them. This is a rack, full rack of spare ribs, and you can see the different portions on the rack, and we'll walk you through it here next. Okay, so let's break down some spare ribs. Lovely spare ribs. The first thing I like to do, and this is just, again, personal, is you have some belly meat right here that's underneath the rib. So you can see where the rib cage is. You've got your rib tip meat here. I'm going to trim this off, and the reason being is because when it's left on the rib cage during cooking, what happens is that it will dry out a lot faster than the rest of the rib, and it will leave it kind of chewy, and it's just not a very pleasant piece of meat to eat. Okay, now that we've trimmed off the belly fat, we're going to go ahead and separate the rib tip from the rib and create our St. Louis style ribs. So we're going to take this breastbone right here, find where the joint is. You have cartilage through here, and it's pretty simple to just run your knife right down through the cartilage, creating a really nice rectangular rack of ribs. Now we're going to trim off the tail and make sure there's no bones from processing, no splinters. Now we have a very nice rack of St. Louis style ribs ready to go on the grill. So once your ribs are prepared and ready, first thing you got to do is get some good seasoning on them. So what I like to do is, if your ribs are dry, you may want to put a little something tacky on it. People will use mustard. I've seen people use mayonnaise. I generally will spray apple cider vinegar on the ribs just to make sure your seasoning will stick. I do 2 layers of seasoning. This Black Label. Why? Because it's just an old container that I've mixed salt, kosher salt, black pepper, onion powder, and garlic powder. That's it. Pretty simple mixture. And I'll take this, some people call it SPG, salt, pepper, garlic powder, but do a light sprinkle across the back side of it. And what this does, a lot of this is just adding some texture and the salt to it, of course. And we'll go across both racks of ribs. And we've got a nice light coverage. Now, this is the Gonzo Sugar Daddy seasoning that I'm using right here, which you'll find in the orange container. Now, this is a really good, it melds well with any type meat. Forgive me for blocking the ribs as I'm going along with my hand, but what I'm doing is keeping the seasoning from going all over the tabletop. So this, sometimes I'll double up on and put a second run, because this is the first part of the rib generally that hits your tongue when you eat your rib, is the bottom of the rib. So you want a good seasoning on it. Sometimes you can even follow with a little spicier seasoning, like the extra spicy Cajun from Daddy Seasonings. That's a really good one too. So once we've got the bottom done, we can, if necessary, put a little moisture on the rib. I'll hit it with both layers. We've got salt, pepper, garlic powder, onion powder. Our SPG is a base, and it always looks better, at least in my opinion, for Texas barbecue when you've got a good coarse salt or a good coarse pepper on there too. The finished product comes out looking a lot better. And then we'll go across with a nice run of Gonzo Sugar Daddy from Daddy Seasoning. This also will give these ribs a really nice mahogany color after they spend about 3.5 to 4 hours on the pit. So remember, when you're preparing ribs, doing the trim, the seasoning, and everything, keep in mind what you want it to look like when it hits the plate. That's why we cut a nice uniform rack right here. And when you slice these ribs, you're going to get a really pretty rib with an exposed bone as a little handle, and it's all going to look good and taste really good.